After writing 2 transformational books myself and supporting many other beings to do the same, I've become enthralled by the deep and mysterious magic that's activated when we choose to say yes to ourselves and commit to the book writing journey. Of course, we want to inspire change and new perspectives in our readers, but the transformation that happens as an author, both throughout the writing process and by actually releasing your book into the world, is surprisingly potent. I know I've been blindsided in the most disruptive and delicious ways by some of the changes my books have brought into my life. Writing a book is like casting a spell. Although we can never be completely sure what's going to be unleashed during the process, we choose to do it anyway. This Unbound one is a heroic journey. Each book has the potential to be a magical portal, a doorway to a new world, both for you and your reader. Each book has a very specific medicine that it's here to share with us. And each book gives us the opportunity to alchemize the magnificent imperfection of our experience into gold. The truth is that anyone can write a book. We could all get a few thousand words down and put them together. But what fascinates me is what happens when we allow the book writing process to go deeper. When we say, fuck it, get naked and dive way down beneath the surface. Letting go of the shoulds and any need to be acceptable, sensible, or approved of. What fascinates me is what happens when we make ourselves fully available to being transformed by the very act of writing a book. This is Unbound Writing, and this is the process we'll be exploring together here in the Unbound Writers Club. I'm Nicola, author and founder of the Unbound Press, and I help magical beings to write the transformational book they're really here to write at this time. I'm your guide here in the Unbound Writers Club, and the aim of this podcast is to help you to feel supported, encouraged, activated as you embark on your book writing journey. Whether you're a first-time author or have many books out in the world, my hope is that you will find something here to inspire you. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Unbound Writers Club. Today I have a very special person as my guest in the club, Amy Babiarz, who is one of our authors at the Unbound Press, a returning guest to the Unbound Writers Club, because Amy has just completed the manuscript for her second book, which is the sequel to After the Last Fall. Her first book and the first fiction book that we ever released through the Unbound Press back in 2020. So After the Last Fall is a tale of magic, like rediscovering magic through the eyes of Jace, who is the main character in Amy's books, or in this series of books. I don't know if I should say it's a series. I think Amy's intending that the second one will be the final one, but we will see. So I wanted to get Amy back onto the podcast to talk about After the Last Fall, her first book. If you haven't read it, if you haven't heard about it, you are going to want to read this book before the sequel, Before We Rise, comes out later in the year. We're thinking kind of May, maybe June time. So, and Amy is amazing because she weaves these like very current themes through her writing in a really genius way, actually. You are going to love her. So let's dive in and let me introduce you to Amy. So Amy, welcome back to the Unbound Writers Club.
Thank you. I am so excited to be able to be back again.
Oh my goddess. I was so, like when I received your email at the end of last year saying, yay, the second book is ready. I was like, oh yes, so excited.
I'm so glad to hear that. Sending that email I never thought I was going to get that book finished, to be honest. So sending that email was just so freeing. And I was so excited to get so much excitement from you about that project.
Yeah, well, I know everyone involved is just as excited, so we're like off the
That's so
chart.
nice to know.
But I'm going to ask the question that I always ask at the beginning of these conversations. And I know I've asked you, I think, a couple of times before, because you've been on the podcast a couple of times. But it feels like it gets to be different every single time. So what does it mean to you right now in this moment to be an unbound writer?
It means to me just absolutely leaning into that authenticity. Especially during COVID, we had a lot of time to get to know ourselves very well because we couldn't go anywhere, right? And so there was a lot of time, there was a lot of introspection, and in all of that, my wife and I picked up and moved across state to an entirely different state. So we just moved the one state over, but that was a huge upheaval. And so in trying to build our new lives out here, being unbound really is about leaning into that authenticity and showing who you are unapologetically instead of letting people try to steal the light from you.
Love that. So let's talk about the first book, where it all began after the last fall. And for those who haven't read the book, don't know what it's about, or maybe actually for those who have read it, but it came out 4 years ago now. Well, coming up for 4 years ago. So can you give us like an overview of the story of After the Last Fall?
Yes, in 4 years, I still haven't learned my elevator pitch, but I will try. So after the last fall is really focused on our main character, Jace. The whole story starts with her realizing that her little sister has absconded, and this has been a problem they've been fighting for a while. And so that's really the catalyst to Jace's sister getting arrested because Battlewood, the court that they live in, is, anti-magic, very, very austere, very by what their dynasty says, right? And so Elika, her little sister, is not doing that. So she gets arrested and she is sentenced to death, but the day of her death, she disappears. So then Jace is sent as punishment to go find her. And she goes through all of these different courts that they haven't been in 100 years because all that communication was cut off for 100 years. And throughout all of that, she starts learning more about herself and learning more about the fact that she and her court have been lied to for 100 years. And now she's starting to uncover things and she doesn't know what to do with it. But there's a lot of challenges as well, excuse me. She really has to come to terms with some of the unsavory behavior she exhibited in the past and dealing with some mental health that she wasn't expecting and really trying to battle the strength she knows she has with the strength she feels she's losing through mental health. So there's a lot of conversation around positive representation and a lot of representation regarding removing that stigma of mental health. So that's kind of a synopsis. That was long-winded, but there it is.
I love it. I love it. And we don't do elevator pitches. So I always trust that whatever comes through is exactly what needs. Like that's how the book wants to be described right now in this moment. So you always knew that there was going to be at least one more book. Is that right?
I did. I had it in my head. It was ending completely differently, actually. When I was first writing it, I was like, yeah, this is how it's going to end, and it's going to open up into the second book. And then I wrote the ending, and I was like, well, I didn't even see that coming, and I'm the writer of it. So I had always anticipated it being more than one book, but it definitely shifted what that second, potentially third book looked like.
Yeah. So what I love is you were our first ever fiction author at the Unbound Press. And the book is, I think what you really showed to me and to our readers and the community, like you cleared the way for this at the Unbound Press, is that a fictional book can be just as transformational as a non-fiction book. Like the themes that you weave through your writing are so powerful. You talked about mental health. There are other issues and themes that you bring through in your writing. And it's so clever the way you do that. And it carries on in the second book as well. I mean, was that always part of your vision?
It was specifically for this book. So I think I told you the first time we had talked about this book, I wasn't looking to write this kind of story. I was actually on my way to do a home visit for a client I was working with, and I was listening to a song, and this part of the song just hit me, and I pulled over to a gas station to like scribble down just the very basic piece that I wanted to remember so it would turn into a story. So I hadn't even planned on writing it, but as soon as I got to know Jace as that main character, I knew that I wanted it to be about showing that there's more than one way to have femininity and it not have to be this really traditional form, or, it's not weak to lean into your femininity. And there are lots of different ways to express that. And then as Jace was getting through and she was talking more about some of the experiences she's had, that really opened the floodgates for having a discussion about what mental health looks like, what family means to her, and how to wrangle knowing that you need help and not knowing how to ask for it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And has it always felt quite, I mean, I know the process of writing is often not easy, but has it felt relatively easy to kind of weave those themes through the book? Has it come quite naturally?
It has, because in the second book, and I'm not gonna spoil too much, but that in the second book, Jace really does really try to work on her mental health needs and really tries to humble herself and ask for help. And so that always came through. I did take a long break writing it just because I lost voice with Jace. I couldn't really figure out where I wanted the story to go. I was trying to force it to be something that I thought would be more palatable, but that was not the story that Jace wanted to tell.
Mm.
And so there was a pretty big break between when I first started it and then when I picked it back up. And then once I picked it back up, we were going.
Ah, that's so interesting. And that you trusted that, like the story that Jace wanted to tell. I mean, what's your relationship like with Jace as a character?
I love her. She's like, I wish I could just give her a hot cup of coffee and wrap her in a blanket and hold her. Like she has a lot of aspects of a lot of women in my life. She has aspects of me. She has aspects of my wife, Sarah. She has a lot of aspects that my sister shares with me and my friends. So Jace is sort of an amalgamation of all of the women in my life who matter. And she's really just sort of taken it and run with it. So I love her. She's my baby. Even after her story is finished being told, I will always have just such a special place for her.
Yeah, it was really good. Like coming back to her, because obviously I've got to read the manuscript for the second book already. Very, very fortunate to do that. Both who's our author relations magician at the Unbound Press, and I read it over Christmas, over the holidays actually, and we both, we were meant to be offering feedback, and it was like there's very little notes we can offer because we were just like so absorbed in the story. So it was so great, yeah, to go with Jace on like this next evolution of her story. And what I love, you mentioned something a bit earlier, and it's something that really stands out for me, is the way that you really showcase like this fierceness alongside the feminine. Like sometimes I think we get this very one-sided view of what femininity is, certainly in the media and in a lot of books that are out there. So I love that not just Jace, actually, a lot of the other characters in the book as well have got this fierceness alongside as well a softness and a tenderness. Yeah. How is it to write that?
It was really interesting. It's always been really important to me when I was writing Jace to make sure that she wasn't such a strong woman that she was like, ew, dresses, ew, girly thing.
Mm.
I never wanted her to shame one version of femininity because that completely defeats the purpose of just being a woman. And there are no experiences as a woman that are the same across anywhere, really. So there were a few times where I kind of feel like I had to sit Jace down and be like, come on, Jace, like you gotta let up. Or, there were a couple of times with the character Harlow, who I introduced, where, it was really important for me that she wasn't just this like really tough person that you could never break through her shell. She was just very particular about the people she let in because of her experiences. And so it was really interesting to write so many, because this one's actually, there are a lot of very strong female characters in the story. And so it was very interesting to have to shift, even in conversation where there were 3, 4 women who were all very strong, very fierce, but very different. I had to sort of go back and temper their voices when I was writing dialogue, because sometimes the things that I wanted said were not the things that they would have said.
That is so interesting, actually. you've done such a great job of that, that it wasn't something that I even thought about when I was reading the manuscript. Like, their different personalities come through so clearly, and there's a lot of skill to being able to do that. Like, I notice how we're really like talking about the next book and teasing what it's going to be. But I want to take you back to, like, after the last fall, when the book came out 2020, you said that you had to take a bit of a break then before coming to the second book. What was it like once the first one came out, knowing that, like, there was going to be a second one, or you wanted there to be a second one? What was that period like for you?
I put a lot of pressure on myself to immediately turn another manuscript around because I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to take me forever. And then everyone's going to forget about my book and no one's going to want to read it because no one's going to know what happened in the first one. So I put a lot of pressure on myself to try and get that manuscript out. And that was where I was forcing things. And then my entire job shifted. I had to go entirely remote. So I had to rebuild the program that I was working through at the time. And so there were a lot of things that kept getting in the way. But every night, when I would go to bed, I felt like there was just like this tiny little door in my brain, and there was this tiny little knock, and Jace was like, "Hello, are you there? Are we doing this?" So it was constantly sitting on me, but I really had to remove that pressure of myself because I wasn't writing. I wasn't writing a good story. I was writing what I thought I needed to produce in order to get it out and get that series buttoned up. So that was hard and very humbling. I think I had to throw out about 23,000 words,
Oh,
which was painful.
I bet. But sometimes, or I think maybe always, like, we have to go through that process in one way or another, like writing what we think the book or the story wants to be. It's like to clear the way for what really wants to come. We have to kind of take the wrong path to realize it's the wrong path, and that we need to kind of backtrack and, yeah, go a different way. So, yeah. So how long of a break did you take between the two?
I don't know. So I started writing immediately. I had already sort of started writing the sequel. Once I had figured out how the first one ended, I had sort of started writing the sequel. And then, so I'm measuring this in like apartments and careers because so much changed during COVID. So we moved to a different apartment, but I think I was already living, I don't know. So I took a big break probably shortly after the book came out. And then I picked it up maybe about a year in. And then I took another big break. I was really struggling at my job then, not my current job. My current job is wonderful, but my job then, it was not aligning with what I wanted to do or what I needed at that time anymore. So I was really struggling with that, and I didn't have much energy to devote to anything. So I would say there were probably year gaps between picking it up, dropping it, picking it up, dropping it. And then shortly after we moved to Vermont, we found a cafe that I went to every single Sunday, and I just cranked it out. My poor wife had to show me how to flip somebody over their shoulder in the middle of this cafe. So it was just an all inclusive event for everybody.
Really?
She didn't actually flip me, I want to be clear, but she had to show me. So she's like standing with her arms around me, and she's a foot taller than me. So, I'll let you build the mental image, but it was an experience.
Did anyone come to your assistance? It's like, what is going on over here?
No, shockingly, nobody did. I think they probably saw us laughing and were like, "Oh, this is
Yeah.
fine."
Okay, that's fair enough. I love it. I think it's really helpful for people to hear about this. Like, sometimes we can imagine, like, our first book goes out there, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, and then it's straight on to the next one. And that somehow it becomes easier with each book. But actually, no, you are
Mm.
shaking your head. I know from my
Uh-uh.
experience that's not true.
Yeah, I feel like it's not easier to write the second book because then you know what you want to happen in the book, but the characters have really become their own people. And so it was like I had said about Jace, I had wanted one thing to happen, and Jace was like, absolutely, we're not doing that. And I had to throw out a ton of writing. And then I introduced this new character that I was like, I knew what her role was supposed to be, but I was fighting it because I was like, no, I can't do that to this other character. And finally, I was like, but why? Why? Because now I'm holding the story back. So it is not easier. It was very hard, and I truly did not think I was ever going to get that manuscript finished.
But you did a great job. How do you feel you changed as a writer? Like from when you were writing after the last fall, the first book, to now where you've completed the second manuscript?
This is going to be kind of a silly one, but I was able to recognize when I was overusing a phrase. My editor for my first book was like, Jace cannot continue to raise and drop her eyebrows. Like she is doing this everywhere. Like apparently Jace was very suspicious. So I was really aware of how much I was having characters do body language in this one in a way that I wasn't, which I think lent itself to sort of painting more of a story rather than saying what their faces were doing. I was saying what was happening around them. So that's kind of a silly one. More significantly, I really was able to discover what themes continue to be vital in what I share and what themes are kind of like, all right, that had its moment. We can set that aside. We'll come back to it if we need to. But it was really beneficial to sort of strengthen the way I write, strengthen the way I build scenes. This one was, there was a lot happening in the story. And so it made me really take a step back and be a lot more thoughtful about what was happening, what had happened to get them there, and where it was supposed to go, so that it wasn't just everything was resolved and we moved on to the next scene, and then everything was resolved and we moved on to the next scene. There was a lot of things that happened at once for the entirety of the book, and I don't know that I would have been able to pull that off the first time.
Yeah, I get that completely. And even though, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, like when the book comes out, and we'll do another podcast conversation all about that. But even though there is a lot happening, you know, a lot happens during the book, it still feels like, as the reader, like there's a spaciousness to it. It feels like, it doesn't feel like, oh, and this happened and this, it's like, it again, there's a really like natural pacing to it. I just feel like you've done a great job with that.
Thank you so much. That's so nice to hear. I know that in my first book, I think I buttoned up the end a little bit quicker than maybe it needed to be buttoned up. So I was trying to be mindful of the pace of this story as well.
Mm. Well, we get to learn with each book, don't we? So yeah, fantastic. So, you know, I think we've kind of done this a little bit already, but can you give us a glimpse of Before We Rise? Like, what is without giving too much away?
Yeah, yeah, I have to be clever about that because it will give away the ending in a second of the first book. Um, Jace spends a lot of this book learning who her allies are.
Mm,
She spends a lot of time wrangling who she was before she had to go on that quest in the first book and who she is now. And it's a lot about figuring out what's happening in her land. And there's a lot of mysteries that kind of pop up. It's a little bit, it's a little bit like a haunted house.
mm,
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of spirits in this story that did not exist before. So it is very much Jace figuring out what she wants to do, how she wants to do it, how she's going to achieve it, and not lose sight of who she has grown into and continues growing into.
mm,
And a lot of characters from the first book come back into this one, and they really encourage her and provide her that support that she never really thought she was going to get.
yeah, very well done there. Didn't give
Thank
anything
you.
away, I don't think.
I don't think so. I tried very hard not to.
How is it different, like going through the process at the moment? You're going through the editing, design process. We were just talking about the cover design, which I haven't seen yet. So Amy was filling me in. I'm like, I can't wait to see it.
So
Um,
excited.
what's it like going through this the second time?
It's really fun. I forgot how it felt to go through the first one and see this thing that was so private and personal suddenly become this thing that's being shared with the world. And it's very vulnerable to put your writing out there. Even if it's fiction, it's very vulnerable. And I think I've also mentioned this before, but I am a Leo, so I have a pride complex and I need everybody to tell me I'm perfect all the time or I'm terrible. So, there has been a lot of setting that aside because not everything is for everybody, right? And so it's been really fun watching everything come back to life because, it's something that, again, I hadn't thought I was ever going to finish it. And I got so sick of looking at it that when I sent it off to you, I got to take a break. And now I'm super excited to share this out. And I'm seeing the cover come together. I'm seeing the concepts in my mind start to come together. And people are excited about it, which is great because that also, that bolsters me and keeps me moving forward on it. So I forgot how much fun it was to get through this process.
Yeah. It is when you've actually completed it and like you're getting to bring it together to be released. And we're aiming for kind of, what do we say? Kind of summer,
Like late spring,
early
early
summer.
summer. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Totally on track for that. So what I want people to know is if you haven't read After the Last Fall, you've got a couple of months to read it, get the book, read it so that you're ready for Before We Rise to come out. Yeah, probably
Yeah.
about May time, maybe. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic, fantastic. How do you feel about After the Last Fall now, Amy?
I'm really proud of it.
Mm,
It's my baby. It honestly is not the first book I thought I was ever going to have published. I hadn't even thought of having this book written. So it's surprising. It still surprises me when I read it. I'm like, oh, yeah, like I did do that, didn't I? It is a little bit hard to go through it every once in a while. There was a lot of going back to the book to make sure there was continuity in the second book. And there
mm,
were times I would read it and I was like, man, I wish I had written this differently, or I wish I had edited something a little bit differently. So it's been interesting because that also helps me track, the way I've changed as a writer. But After the Last Fall, I think is always going to hold just like that very special place to me. It's sort of my baby because it came out of nowhere and it ended up bringing so many of the dreams I've had for decades to fruition.
fantastic. And you're definitely not alone in that. When we look back at our books, it's like, oh, yeah, I wish I'd done that a bit differently. Like, it's always going to happen. It will happen with this next one as well when you come
Oh
back
yeah.
to it.
We're our best critics.
Exactly, exactly. Oh, so Amy, so for people who want to keep in touch with you, like follow along, obviously they can follow along with us at the Unbound Press, and we'll be letting you know when the book is coming out. We'll be having another podcast conversation then as well. But what's the best way for them to follow and connect with you?
So I have a Facebook page. It's just Amy Babiarz. I had to think about that. I changed my last name when my wife and I got married, so I had to think about the name. So it's Amy Babiarz on Facebook, and then on Instagram, my name is Babowitz08, which that's the social media I use the most. But honestly, it's mostly for pictures of my cats. So
We love
you're not
that.
gonna get like a lot of writer stuff, but if you like cats, one of these cats makes an appearance in this book. So you can see my muse, and then I do have a website. I think it's amybabiarz.wordpress.com. So those things are they're active. I don't use them as often as I probably should, but that's where you can find me.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. We'll make sure all the details are in the show notes. And as I said, people can follow along with us at the Unbound Press and keep in touch with where we are with Before We Rise. And we'll definitely be speaking again around the release date. Amy, thank you so much for trusting this next book with us. So, so excited for it to go out into the world. Like I said, if you haven't read After the Last Fall, you need to read it now. You've got a couple of months. Get it ordered, get ready, and then you can dive straight into the second one. It's such a pleasure to have you as part of the Unbound Press family, Amy, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
What do you do when you want to write a book, but the usual approaches are leaving you feeling restricted, pressurized, not at all enough, and pretty dry, to be honest? You find another way, of course. And if you are listening to this, my free unconventional book writing guide is going to be perfect for you. It's designed especially for soul-led coaches, healers, and mentors who want to write a transformational book without spending hours on end chained to a desk. In it, I'm giving you my unique spin on the top 10 questions I hear from would-be authors, and it's going to help you liberate the way you write forever. Download your free copy of the guide now over at nicolahumber.com/10, the number 10, 10 hyphen questions.